My name's Maren, and this is my story, told the way I lived it. I was 34 when I finally bought my own place. 10 years of saving. 10 years of watching other people my age post pictures of new kitchens and backyard barbecues while I ate rice and beans in a rented studio apartment and told myself, soon. I'm not going to pretend I had some tragic upbringing that made homeownership some enormous emotional milestone. I just wanted something that was mine. No landlord. No shared walls with someone's screaming toddler. No 6-month leases hanging over my head like a guillotine. Just a door I could lock and know for certain that it belonged to me. Being single on a mortgage meant compromises. Banks don't care about your dreams. They care about your debt-to-income ratio. So when my budget kept bumping against reality, I started looking at properties on shared blocks, multiple units, one lot, split ownership. In my area, that usually meant a strata title, a communal legal structure where you share costs, share insurance, share decisions, and answer to a body corporate for things as small as what color you paint your fence. I am, by nature, a deeply private person. The idea of needing sign-off from neighbors to change my own front door was suffocating. So I made it my mission to avoid strata titles entirely. And then I found it. The perfect property. On a shared block, technically, but freehold. My own title, my own land, my own rules. The only shared cost was public liability insurance on a walkway between the two properties, split evenly with my neighbor. Reasonable. Simple. Clean. The real estate agent selling it, I'll call him Grant, was local. 6 degrees of separation collapsed into about 3. Friends of friends knew him, vouched for him in that easy, small-town way where reputation does half the selling for you. I didn't know him personally, but knowing of him felt like enough of a safety net. I read every listing. Freehold, freehold, freehold. I asked directly more than once and got the same answer each time. I signed. I moved in. I hung curtains I'd bought years earlier and never had a window to put them in. For the first time in a decade, I exhaled. 5 months later, there was a knock at my door. It was the landlord who owned the neighboring property, not living there himself, just renting it out, and he wanted to talk about insurance. Nothing dramatic, just admin. I asked him to send over a copy of the policy, so I'd have it on file, the way you do when you're trying to be a responsible adult about paperwork you don't fully understand yet. The email arrived a few days later. I opened the PDF expecting the usual public liability document for a shared walkway. Instead, I was looking at a strata insurance policy. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. I called my lawyer, the one who'd handled the conveyancing, who'd sat across from me months earlier, and confirmed, in plain language, that this was a freehold title. He pulled the file. He went quiet in that particular way lawyers go quiet right before they say something you don't want to hear. This is a strata title, he said. It has been the whole time. I sat down on the floor of my own kitchen. The kitchen I thought I owned outright, and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Not rage yet. Just disbelief. Thick and slow. The kind that makes you replay every conversation looking for the moment you missed the truth. I gathered everything. Every printed listing that said freehold. Every email exchange between Grant and my lawyer confirming the same. I laid it all out on a conference table like a prosecutor building a case, because in every way that mattered, I was. Grant sat across from me, unbothered, hands folded, wearing the same easy salesman calm he'd had the day I signed. I walked him through the documents. Freehold in the listing. Freehold in the emails. Freehold, freehold, freehold. And then the strata policy that proved in black and white none of it was true. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize either. Not once. He said something about paperwork errors, about how strata and freehold get confused sometimes, about how ultimately the sale had gone through and the property was mine regardless. As if the category of ownership I'd spent 10 years planning my entire financial life around was a rounding error. I want to be clear about something. I don't actually blame him for protecting himself. That's what people do. What I couldn't forgive was the refusal to even acknowledge it. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just a shrug dressed up in a suit. I proposed mediation. I asked for one thing, one reasonable, modest thing, that when I eventually sold the property, they would either handle the sale or cover the agent's costs. That's it. Not a payout. Not a lawsuit. Just an acknowledgement, functionally, that they'd have to make this right eventually. They offered me $1,000 to disappear. The mediator, someone who is supposed to remain neutral, actually pulled me aside afterward and told me, off the record, that I should pursue this legally. That I had a real case. I didn't. Partly because my health wasn't in a place to survive a legal battle, stress does things to a body that lawyers never put in their invoices. But partly, if I'm honest, because I realized something in that meeting room that changed the entire shape of what came next. Grant wasn't scared of the law. Companies budget for lawsuits. Agents get insurance for exactly this. A legal fight was a line item to him, not a consequence. But he was, unmistakably, a man who thought he'd gotten away with something. And men like that, they're not afraid of getting caught doing something wrong. They're terrified of getting caught doing something personal. I didn't do anything for weeks. I let the anger cool into something more useful, patience. I found Grant's personal Facebook page. It wasn't private, which told me a lot about how safe this man felt in his own life. Scrolling through it, I found photo albums from a boys' trip he'd taken about 5 to 6 months before I bought the property, sunburned faces, hotel balconies, the kind of trip men take right before they get married, or right after they start regretting it. I also found his home address through a business registration search, public record, freely available, no hacking required, nothing illegal about looking at what a person voluntarily puts in front of the world. And then I picked a date. The anniversary of the sale. The day the contract closed, the day I signed away my trust based on a lie. It felt fitting, poetic, even, to make that date mean something to him too. I wrote a card. Short. Deliberately strange. Just specific enough to plant a seed and vague enough that it could mean almost anything to almost anyone paranoid enough to wonder. Dear Grant, remembering you, on this, our special day. She has your eyes. Love, Elle. I sent flowers to his office with that note attached. I told myself it was harmless. A prank. A little psychological itch that would needle him for a day and then fade. I had no idea, at the time, exactly how deep that itch would go. The following year, on the same date, I sent flowers again. Slightly different wording. Same signature. Same aching, unresolved implication of a woman and a child he'd apparently walked away from. I did this for 6 consecutive years. Some years it was flowers. Other times I arranged for postcards and letters to be mailed from the country he'd visited on that boys' trip, always timed, always signed the same way, love, Elle. I want to be honest about the psychology of doing this, because it wasn't simple satisfaction. There were stretches of months where I forgot about it entirely, living my life, going to work, and then the date would creep up on the calendar, and I'd feel this strange, quiet thrill, not hatred exactly, more like tending a garden you planted out of spite, and were mildly surprised to find still growing. I never contacted him directly again. Never called. Never showed up. I just let a ghost named Elle live in the corner of his life, once a year, like a tide he couldn't predict but somehow always arrived. Here's the part that I did not plan and could not have planned because I didn't have this information when I started. 3 weeks ago, through the same web of friends that had originally vouched for Grant, I heard what had actually happened to him. His marriage had ended. He'd lost the house. He was no longer working as a real estate agent at all. The story, as it was told to me, went like this. Every year, his wife noticed the same strange gifts arriving, flowers, postcards, always around the same date, always with that same eerie signature. For years she'd brushed it off. But eventually she did the math. She lined the date up against their relationship timeline and realized what it meant. He admitted to an affair. But here's the detail that turned my stomach, the piece of the story I never intended and never wanted. Apparently, about a year before I even bought the property, so right around the same window as that boys' trip, Grant had come home with a sexually transmitted infection. He had passed it to his wife. And he had convinced her at the time that it wasn't from him. Which means the date I picked, the one I'd chosen simply because it was my anniversary, the day I signed the contract, happened to fall almost exactly 1 year after whatever encounter on that trip had actually caused the infection. I didn't know that when I started. I want to be completely honest about that. I wasn't aiming for that wound. I was aiming for a much smaller, much pettier one, the discomfort of a mysterious woman he couldn't place. I had no idea I was accidentally circling the exact date of something real. But karma, it turns out, doesn't care whether you're aiming carefully. Sometimes it just uses whatever's already loaded in the chamber. He lost the house. He lost roughly half his retirement savings in the divorce settlement. He lost the business, the same easy, well-connected reputation that once made me feel safe signing a contract with him. Gone. And somewhere in his life now, I imagine, there's a man who still doesn't fully know who Elle was, or why she chose that date, or why the universe seemed to conspire so precisely against him. I do feel a flicker of guilt sometimes. I'm not a monster. I never wanted his marriage collateral damaged by something he'd already broken long before I ever met him. But then I remember the conference table, the printed listings, the $1,000 buyout offer, the shrug where an apology should have been, and the guilt passes quickly. I don't think revenge has to be loud to be effective. Sometimes the most devastating consequences are the ones a person builds for themselves, slowly, over years, while you just wait. I never lied to Grant. I never broke into anything, never hacked anything, never even spoke to him again after that mediation meeting. I just planted one small, strange seed on a public Facebook page and let time do what time does. Karma, like me, turned out to be patient.